A hidden truth finally revealed. Today we uncover a revelation no one anticipated. Darren McGrady, once the personal chef to Princess Diana, has remained silent for over 2 decades. But that silence has ended. He's finally opening up about what life was truly like behind palace doors. A story more powerful and emotional than anything you've heard before. Prepare yourself. This is a truth that demands to be heard. The silence that echoed through the palace. For over 20 years, one man stayed quiet while the world watched a royal tragedy unfold. The headlines, the documentaries, they replayed the same old scenes. But Darren McGrady, hidden behind the scenes in the royal kitchens, kept his memories private. He cooked for Princess Diana, Princes William and Harry, and Queen Elizabeth herself. He wasn't an official, nor a spokesperson. He was simply there, watching as the fairy tale crumbled. And for decades he said nothing. That silence shattered recently, not slowly but suddenly. It broke when the woman many believe had once caused Diana's heartbreak was crowned. The world celebrated King Charles III and Queen Camilla with fanfare and flashing cameras. Historians and tabloids buzzed, but no one expected McGrady to speak. And yet he did, not with bitterness and not in a memoir. He actually supported the coronation, saying it was possible to honor the past while embracing the present. It was a mature, balanced response, but not everyone saw it that way. The backlash came swiftly. People were stunned. How could he? They asked. How could the man who stood by Diana in her darkest hours, who cooked her final meal, support the woman she cried over? The internet exploded with outrage. Critics labeled him a traitor to Diana's memory, accusing him of rewriting history. He became the target of condemnation simply for expressing an opinion. But that outrage didn't break him. It awakened him. Sometimes we don't realize how deeply we remember someone until we're accused of forgetting. And sometimes silence isn't peace, it's pressure. As the criticism swelled, old memories resurfaced. This wasn't a man chasing fame. This was someone pushed to the edge, burdened by truths he'd held for too long. The uproar didn't silence him, it gave him clarity. He began to reflect on the private moments no headline had captured, the quiet pain, the untold heartbreak. He didn't speak to cause harm or stir scandal. He spoke from memory, from love. This wasn't gossip. It was grief, released. Though years had passed, the emotional weight of serving a royal family never really left him. And once he opened up, the floodgates opened too. He painted a portrait not with drama but with small details. The smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, the meals untouched, the nightly juice orders that suddenly stopped. Moments no one noticed, but that broke his heart just the same. Darren wasn't seen in photos. He wasn't part of the public performances. He was there during the in-between moments, the real ones. When Diana stood quietly at the kitchen door in her robe, when she asked for yogurt without words, needing only to be noticed. Now those quiet memories are louder than ever. This wasn't about the coronation, it was about healing, about remembering pain that time had tried to bury. Camilla might wear a crown now, but McGrady remembers what came before it. He didn't speak out to attack the monarchy. He spoke out because silence had erased too much. Though Diana was beloved around the world, many of her stories faded after her death. The coronation wasn't just tradition, it felt like a reset, a rewriting. But Darren had carried too much for too long. He wasn't asked to speak, but he knew it was time. He never wanted to be Diana's voice. He didn't seek the spotlight. But while others moved on, he remembered. Not just the major moments, but the subtle ones. The ones that made her human. The ones a crown can't protect you from. The ones that make loss feel permanent. Now that the silence has broken, nothing will feel quite the same again. Because after 25 years of silence, words hit harder. They tear through the polished image of royalty like a storm through stained glass. To truly understand, we must go back to where it all began. Not to a throne, but to a kitchen. Diana wasn't just a princess. She was a woman fighting to stay human in a golden prison. Not at ceremonies, but in the everyday. because sometimes the moments that matter most happen when no one's watching. Diana. Life behind the curtains. Darren McGrady wasn't a royal. He was just another cook in a sea of white coats and polished pans. At Buckingham Palace, he was the lowest-ranked chef, number 20 out of 20. His tasks were simple: prepare the frozen vegetables and follow instructions. What he didn't know was that his place by the ovens would become the backdrop for one of the most sorrowful stories the royal family has ever known. And the woman at the heart of it wasn't on display or giving speeches. She walked into the kitchen barefoot, asking for orange juice. Diana stood out not because of jewels or titles, but because of kindness. She said thank you. She carried her own plates. She broke palace protocol in soft, quiet ways, going to the kitchen for yogurt or snacks for her boys. She wanted to feel real again. Her presence changed the atmosphere. You could feel it when she was near. In a place full of rules and invisible walls, Diana made the staff feel human. She remembered names. She asked about people's lives. She laughed when things went wrong. McGrady saw it, not just in public, but in private, when she slipped in for carrot juice or smiled at the dishwasher like he was a guest of honor. This wasn't a princess putting on a show. This was a woman clinging to something ordinary, something authentic. In the beginning, there was hope. A young couple in love seemed to warm even the coldest parts of the palace. But slowly that light faded. The nightly requests for juice stopped. Meals returned untouched. Her voice grew softer, and almost no one noticed. But Darren McGrady did. Week by week, she faded. Every passing week, her presence seemed to shrink. Though no one dared to voice it, everyone in the palace could feel it. Diana was slipping away. Darren McGrady noticed every sign. She didn't need to explain. The clues were everywhere. Her appetite vanished, but that wasn't all. Some nights her eyes looked swollen, as if she'd been crying for hours. Other times she avoided the kitchen altogether. The once bright woman who used to laugh with the staff now drifted through the halls like a shadow, disappearing faster than the dishes could be cleared. McGrady sensed something was terribly wrong, though the full picture wasn't yet clear. Then came the name. A quiet whisper at first. Camilla. At the beginning it was mentioned cautiously, almost like a secret. But that name grew louder. It found its way into whispered arguments, hung in the air during tense meals, and cast a chill that settled over every sideways glance between Charles and Diana. No one needed to spell it out. The tension was tangible. You could feel it in how people stood, how orders were given and then forgotten, how silence filled the spaces once occupied by laughter. The magic had turned sour, and McGrady witnessed that transformation firsthand. He had already seen the damage before the world caught up. Words used behind closed doors had become weapons, slowly chipping away at Diana's spirit. Outwardly, the palace carried on as if nothing had changed, but inside, the woman they were meant to protect was shrinking. Her familiar routines, those small comforts, began to vanish. Juice became an afterthought. Her laughter faded. The light that once made her the soul of the palace dimmed until it was barely a flicker. And still, she smiled in public. She waved to the crowds. But behind the palace gates, she was withdrawing. McGrady didn't voice concerns. He didn't ask questions. He just kept showing up, preparing meals she often never touched. The kitchen, after all, was the one place where truth couldn't be disguised. He saw her carry pain with grace. He saw kindness in a woman who had every reason to be bitter. While the world read headlines, he watched her try to stay composed. He didn't see royalty. He saw a woman fighting to hold on to herself as betrayal and silence closed in around her. What Darren couldn't prevent was the shift that came when Camilla stopped being a whispered name and became a headline. Diana's sadness no longer came and went. It stayed with her. It revealed itself in skipped meals and sleepless nights. And while the world clung to their idea of a royal love story, McGrady knew it was unraveling. When food no longer matters, when joy becomes irrelevant, something else takes hold. Diana changed, and Darren was left holding memories the grandeur of any palace couldn't cover up, because the whispers didn't stay whispers. And what followed exposed everything. The woman never meant to be queen. Whatever privacy Buckingham Palace offered, it wasn't enough to muffle the truth. Behind those ornate walls, tension echoed louder than the applause outside. The fairy tale had ended long ago. The marriage of Charles and Diana was no longer a symbol of unity, it was strained and splintered. The staff felt it. They moved slower. Conversations happened behind closed doors, and always the same name returned: Camilla. What started as quiet turmoil soon became public knowledge. The release of the infamous Camilla-gate tapes marked a breaking point. The tone of Charles and Camilla's private conversations wasn't just affectionate, it was humiliating. The image of a pristine royal family shattered overnight. People weren't just surprised, they were outraged, heartbroken. Diana had already suffered, now she had to endure global humiliation. McGrady wasn't shocked by the news. He had seen it coming long before the public did. The untouched plates, the dark circles, the silences. Her radiance, once untouchable, had dulled into something cautious and wounded. Yet outside, people didn't truly understand until Diana broke her silence. Her 1995 interview with Panorama became one of the most iconic in royal history. She said aloud what many had suspected but never heard from her own mouth. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," she said. It wasn't vindictive. It didn't need to be. The calmness in her voice made the truth even more piercing. For McGrady, it wasn't a revelation. It was confirmation. He had seen what she described through forgotten meals, trembling hands, long pauses, and midnight visits to the kitchen when she just needed space to breathe. The world may have been stunned, but McGrady simply nodded. Diana had finally said what needed to be said, and he knew the cost of those words would be heavy. Steps toward freedom. Change didn't come all at once, but it came. After her separation from Charles became official, Diana moved to Kensington Palace. The atmosphere there was different, less rigid, less cold. It lacked the crushing weight of the crown. McGrady noticed the transformation. Diana began exercising regularly. She drank juice again, carrot, celery, apple, whatever she fancied. She smiled more, not for the cameras, but for herself. Her focus turned to her causes, her passions, her sons. She was strong, yet carried a softness that felt almost sacred. It wasn't a perfect healing, but it was a beginning, a quiet reclaiming of her life. Then it ended, just as she seemed to be finding her way back. It was a quiet Sunday morning. Darren had prepared a light meal for her return from Paris. She was due back that day. The kitchen was calm. The fridge was stocked. Everything was in place. But Diana never returned. Only a story remained. When the news arrived, it didn't feel real. Darren froze. The television played it on a loop, a nightmare that wouldn't stop. Like millions of others, his world shifted in an instant. She was gone. He rushed to the kitchen, stunned but not entirely surprised. Yet when her final will was handed over and official documents replaced her presence, the truth hit hard. There would be no return, no footsteps down the hallway. The food he had lovingly prepared remained untouched on the counter, another meal made with care that would never be eaten. Outside the palace, grief swept across the globe. Over 2.5 billion people watched her farewell. Flowers blanketed the gates. Music filled the air in her memory. But inside, the kitchen fell into silence. Grief settled into every corner, and those who once bustled about now moved slowly, as if time itself had dulled. A divided farewell. When Diana passed away, the sorrow was global. Streets filled with mourners, tributes flowed endlessly, and grown men cried openly at palace gates. She wasn't merely a royal figure, she was a force. Her death cast a shadow that dimmed the whole world. Within the palace, the atmosphere changed. The staff, those who knew her laughter, her habits, her quiet strength, barely spoke. Mourning in such an intimate setting felt almost sacred. And when it came time to plan her funeral, one decision was obvious to everyone: Camilla. There were whispers about her attending. Some thought it might be a gesture of dignity, but Queen Elizabeth made her position clear. Camilla would not be present. No arguments were raised. It wasn't just protocol, It was a recognition of how the public felt. Camilla standing near that coffin would have been seen as an offense, a wound reopened. The Queen knew that the nation wasn't ready. Perhaps the family wasn't either. Diana's final tribute was meaningful. Darren McGrady stood with the rest of the palace staff, watching silently as the woman who once brought warmth to cold corridors was taken away under a gray, mournful sky. The grief was not just for a princess, it was for a light extinguished far too soon. Over 2 billion people bore witness to her farewell, a love too genuine to be faked. Yet mourning couldn't reverse time. Life in the royal household moved forward, stories evolved, and eventually something that once seemed unthinkable came to pass. Charles married Camilla. The ceremony was modest, far from the global spectacle of Diana's wedding. No grand broadcast, no national celebration. For Darren and many others, it didn't feel like a continuation. It felt like a rewrite. McGrady didn't attend. He didn't watch. He kept quiet. Not from bitterness, but because the silence said more. It wasn't healing, it was replacement, a rebranding of history, polished and repackaged. But truth doesn't vanish just because it's not spoken. The fade of a presence. During Diana's time, others in the palace sensed the tension too. It wasn't always visible, but it was there, in hushed tones, in the weight of silence. No one dared write it down. But they remembered, not just a woman, but an energy. A gentleness that once softened the palace walls. The new marriage didn't feel like closure. It felt like the first page of a rewritten story. Every time the public saw a smiling Camilla beside Charles or glimpsed them on balconies once graced by Diana, it seemed her memory was slowly being brushed aside. And it wasn't just the ceremony that made it painful, it was something Diana herself had once said, long before it came to pass. A line Darren could never forget. "One day that girl who stole my husband will be queen." Now she was there, wearing the title, standing beside the king, smiling from royal balconies that had once belonged to Diana. For those who knew the full story, that smile didn't signal triumph. It felt like erasure, as if history had been covered in gold leaf to mask the cracks beneath. Once the crown touched Camilla's head, subtle shifts began within the palace, far from public view. This wasn't merely a new union, it was a quiet clearing of everything Diana had left behind. Camilla's quiet replacement. Camilla's arrival at Clarence House, then Buckingham Palace, wasn't loud or celebrated. There were no headlines, just quiet transitions. For those who had loved Diana, though, the changes felt sharp. It began almost imperceptibly. A photograph removed from a hallway, her beloved forget-me-nots replaced by Camilla's preferred white blooms. A shelf rearranged, a painting replaced. No announcements were made. But McGrady noticed. He remembered Diana selecting those items, not for show, but for comfort. They reminded her that she mattered in a place where she often felt invisible. Now, one by one, those comforts were disappearing. More than decor. It wasn't just household items, it was memory, evidence of a life once lived within those walls. The gentle colors, the comforting textures, the personal touches that made the palace feel less like a museum and more like a home. Diana preferred the soft pink china in private. She had chosen it herself. There had been photographs of her laughing, holding her boys' hands, pieces of her story displayed quietly in corners of the house. Slowly, they vanished, one by one, and none returned. Some believed Camilla simply wanted to make her own mark, to define her own space and what it meant to be a modern royal. But to Darren McGrady, it meant something different. He knew what real elegance was. This didn't feel like a fresh start, it felt like a removal. Not a new coat of paint, but a deliberate overwriting of the past. No one talked about it openly, but the silence was deafening. Diana no longer walked those hallways, and soon you couldn't even tell she once had. It wasn't the missing objects that hurt most. It was what they had symbolized. A specific flower, a fabric swatch, a framed photograph beside the stairwell. These weren't just decorations, they were remnants of a person, signs that she had once brought warmth and fire into the palace. To the staff who had loved and served her, these tokens offered quiet comfort. Now they were being packed away, boxed up, as if she had never existed. Darren never raised his voice. He didn't rush to the tabloids. For years he watched quietly as the transformation unfolded. But the moment that broke him came silently. It happened when the final photograph of Diana, once moved discreetly to a private room, was removed completely. No announcement, just absence. The kind of absence that echoes louder than any scandal. Because this time it wasn't just Diana who was gone. It was every trace of her presence. That was the moment something shifted in him. Not a dramatic rage, but a raw clarity. He realized the home she had once filled with life was now erasing her entirely. The process wasn't loud. It was efficient, calculated, and cold. So he said it. She is completely bad. Not for headlines, not out of resentment, but because the silence had gone on too long. His words weren't shouted. They were whispered. But that whisper carried the weight of years of truth no one had dared to speak. He hadn't spoken during the media frenzy, not during the biographies. He waited until the last tangible piece of Diana had disappeared, until every room had been subtly repurposed, softened, and stripped of the soul she gave it. To outsiders, it looked like redecorating. To Darren, it looked like revision, a slow, deliberate erasure of a woman the world had loved. Her memory wasn't replaced with affection, it was replaced with control, with stage-managed beauty, like a memory edited to perfection, with cream drapes and manicured flower arrangements. A legacy disrupted everything changed when Darren's words finally surfaced. He wasn't royalty, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had been silent for decades and chose to speak only when the truth felt unbearable. His words struck a nerve. People didn't hear gossip. They heard gratitude. On social media, messages poured in. So many had felt it for years. Diana hadn't just been mistreated, she had been erased. And now someone had the courage to confirm it. Support flooded in. People shared her old interviews again, images of her lit-up timelines, fan pages grew, tributes reappeared. Diana's voice, long silenced, had returned with strength, but not everyone applauded. Critics accused McGrady of bad timing. Some said he broke an unspoken royal code, others claimed he was chasing relevance. But supporters countered with one simple truth. If attention was his goal, he could have spoken out 2 decades earlier. He stayed silent until silence became betrayal. The ripple effect was undeniable. Camilla's carefully reconstructed public image, so many years in the making, began to fracture. People revisited old footage, asked new questions, and reconsidered what they had once accepted. The crown still sat on her head, but something had shifted beneath it. McGrady didn't speak to destroy her. He spoke for the one who could no longer speak for herself. He called it loyalty. "Now is the right time to speak," he said. That one sentence became a battle cry for those who still carried Diana in their hearts. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss a moment like this, and tap the next video appearing now to keep her memory alive.